All right, let's get this party started. So, Polyhack, I'm talking about UI. Slightly better logo than before. Yeah, right off the start. And this Mac is not working. I don't know how to use a Mac.
Just use the arrow keys.
I did. Nothing. Okay, there we go. So, my name is Viljar Väli, which is apparently very hard for any English-speaking people to say, so Will. I've been working in the software and IT industry for 10 years. I've worked for notable places like the NATO Cybersecurity of Excellence, the Estonian military, and I've also worked for AMD as their UI and UX project manager. And I also co-founded with Adam there, Throwaway Games, which he already said that we make video games and all kind of digital media stuff. So that's from what I've done. Let's get to it. How not to suck at UI. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture here? No? Yeah, that's good. Different font sizes. It's actually not black. It's an offset of black, but since it's a screen, it's hard to see.
Well, your 2 is too large, so it's drawing the attention towards 2, which makes no sense. And also how not and suck is shown in white, which obviously makes it more visible than the rest of the picture, which again may or may not be desirable, especially the word suck, putting an emphasis on it right away.
See, this guy gets it right away.
It's not in Comic Sans.
It's not Comic Sans. Oh Jesus! If somebody put comics, oh man, that would be, oh God. Let's not do that. Let's not do. So yeah, too much emphasis on the 2. Lots of issues with different types of colors that draw different attention, and you can have it stylistically from a geometric perspective, it might look good, but from a readability perspective, it's quite terrible. So that's like just an example of how not to do things. But what makes good UI and UX? Can anybody guess? Any thoughts, ideas?
Seamlessness, you kind of automatically navigate towards your end result without thinking too hard about it.
Yeah, you could say that. Anyone else?
It's just minimalism.
Yes and no. Minimalism in the sense that if it works with the project that you're trying to develop, then yes, that would be correct. Easy to use? Well, I would assume that if you're designing any sort of user experience, easy to use. Well, it can be relative, but is probably on top of the priority list.
Intuitive?
Yeah, you can say that, but let's say I sum it up in a way that good UI and UX can be described in a way that if it's unnoticeable. If you're using an app and you don't pay much attention to the UI, that is not, oh, this doesn't make any sense, this looks wrong, this looks kind of stupid, why is it doing that, right? So good UI can be described that if you don't notice it, that's when you know that you've done something right. But yeah, it's like all the suggestions here. Yeah, this it's it's all of those, but summarized is what I just give a summary of all what you said is easy to use, intuitive, but all of those things can be very, very hard to achieve, and you need to do a lot of like actual product testing before you see what's right and what's wrong, because what's right in your head might not be right for everybody else. And what makes a good UI designer is someone who doesn't look at things from their perspective, and they'll think, I think this is good, I understand this, therefore this must be correct. That's not a good practice to have. A good practice to have is based on experience, looking at what everybody else is doing, testing apps yourself and seeing what is sort of standardized, what people see as a very sort of engraved into their minds as like Google, when we're talking about, let's say, Android versus iOS on the phone, what they have as something engraved into, like Google has this action button that they have, and people know what that means now, and since they introduced their material design. So things like that, when you build your UI, you can focus on giving that a thought, right? This is how I teach the use of this to the user, and this is how the user gets used to this idea. Is like having a clear path to an action that's not sort of convoluted in a way. That's sometimes having minimalism, like Michael suggested, is good. We'll come to that in one of the slides as well. Sometimes minimalism doesn't just work because you just can't have minimalism. We'll have an example of that as well. So of course, talking about the UI look as well is knowing what kind of colors to use, because sometimes I've seen many applications use sort of, they just look terrible because the color combinations are very bad. So easy way to do this, let's say you're a programmer, you have no idea what color to use. There is a website called color.adobe.com that has this color wheel, and it will give you tri-colors and like complementary colors and monochrome colors. And it's like colors of the same color that are, it's like, see this as like, if you choose blue, it will give you good blues, right? So that's, any questions on the color part or any other parts? No? Everybody knows how to make UIs. Margins, cannot stress enough how many times I had to go to programmers and put in some margins. Margins make things look good, and that's why Google has also put a lot of money into developing their material design, where they have exact specifications for how to wrap a button around text and what looks good, at what point it starts looking good and what point it looks too compressed. So usually what I do for margins is I have either a power of 2 or a add of 2 or have some sort of multiple of 2. So let's say if I choose 4 pixels, next will be, I will choose 8, 16, 24, 32, 64, and so on and so forth. And having those, putting in place margins will help any type of UI that you're making look better. It just visually, if a button color is wrapped around the text like really tightly, it just looks bad. Aesthetically, it's just something that happens. Of course, this is like a no-brainer, is a logic, right? What was mentioned here before when we were talking about what makes good UI is coming up with logic paths for how the user is going to use your app and what you want the user's main focus to be. If it's like posting things, then how the posting should be in front of the user, very easily understood, that the path to that is simple. And when we're talking about game UI as well, as because if you see a lot of games, let's say very UI heavy games, there's certain trends you can follow and look up and see where people are putting, let's say the environment map, where people are putting the resources you're gathering, and other functions that, let's say you click on something on a map, where the information of that comes in. So figuring all this stuff out on your own If you are capable, you can probably do it, but the best way is to just go look up games and how they do the UI and try to figure out why they're putting it there exactly as like, because sometimes even game developers make mistakes and sometimes their UI might not be the best and because they either didn't pay too much attention. Yep.
On this last slide, there's the margins.
Yeah.
When you say like you'll have powers of 2 for your margins, distance between the top of the word and the wraparound?
Yeah, so I can just go back here. Just to demonstrate here. So let's say you have this, right? And this text here. So this area right here, which this text is in this box, right? So if you're making a button like this, is how big do you make this area, right? So let's say you have a very big text and it's taking up a lot of room, then you make the margin bigger, right? Let's say this text is maybe 64, then you make the margin here 32, right? Or 24. It's also a lot about testing the visuals of how much room you have on your app or your application, whether it's a website or a video game. A lot of it has to be visually tested, but a good cue is knowing that if something is this big, I'm going to put this much wrap around it. Does it answer your question? All right. So yeah, this is logic is something that is probably one of the heaviest elements that you need to test the most. Because it just isn't something that you can account for in every way. Because if you, for instance, if you are developing a very UI-centric heavy game, then a lot of things you'll go back and revisit, and don't be afraid to do that because sometimes things work, sometimes things doesn't work. And a good way is test it on your friends and say, hey, does this make sense? And always test it on people that are your target audience, because a person who only plays shooter games is not going to understand like Europa Universalis UI, because they're going to look at this and this is like overwhelming. Speaking of this, so yeah, as Michael mentioned, it's like a minimal UI. One of the quotes from our VPs at AMD was that the best UI is if there is no UI. And for instance, I brought up here an example of Tomb Raider. That their UI is not visible if you're not interacting with anything on the game area. So if you only go to like a campfire or near like an item, it highlights it and then gives you some sort of UI and then goes into a more specific UI, which works for this game, but for Europa Universalis, it doesn't work that well because there is a lot of crap on this page. Like this is not even all of it. This is just some of it is like blurred away on the other side just to make this look better. But as you can see, there's a lot of information here. And if you never played this game or these types of games, this could be overwhelming. Is it bad UI? Once you get to use it, it's very simple to use. And this is the balance you need to strike as if you're looking at UI or any sort of design, whether it's your app, your game, or your phone, is it for people who need lots of functionality or people who need to do things really, really quickly? And it's all based on who your target audience is. And for instance, for this game, the people who play this type of game, they are not afraid of these kinds of UIs. They will take the time and learn this UI and be like, so that's my last slide, but this was very, very, very like maybe 0.1% of how UI stuff should be handled. But any questions you want to ask before I end?
Yes, when you actually pick colors, right, to actually match with each other, is there like a science to it, or you should go with
There is a science. There is a science. Like I mentioned before, there is a tool that Adobe has that you go onto and pick a color you want to use, and then it gives you matching colors or triple colors that are opposite colors that work with that color specifically. And the thing is also is knowing what colors would work for your game. For let's say you're making an app, there are, let's say, black and white works very well. But if you're using pastel colors, then there are certain pastel colors that work better. Especially if you look at modern design, everybody's using pastel versions of colors. So if you're picking red, you're picking a slightly softer red that's not right in your face, like the 90s or the 80s. That was like, it's like you look at the logo and it's blinding my face. It's what the 50-year-old managers want in their. The UI needs to pop, man. So that might not be the best looking UI, but if the manager asks, then you're gonna be like, how do I manage this? Any more questions?
Yeah. With back on color as well, like in some other fields, what you usually do when you build like a map, for example, you start with black and white or grayscale, and then you move color into it. Do you do the same with when you make UIs?
Personally, I don't do that for UIs because I already in my head from experience know what colors I want. So if I pick 3 colors that I want to, main colors I want for use for the app, as I start with white and then I use a shade of blue and then I use, let's say, a shade of green, then I already know the types of greens that I'm using. But that's why you have those tools that will help you choose, and then you can go and look. It's all about like going online and looking at what kind of colors people are using, because the trends change a lot and it depends on what the feel of your product is, right? If you're making a mom and pop shop, you want like very light pastel colors. You don't want something very sharp and corporate like a black, like Uber has black and white, because they are very like, they started off a very posh app, so they sort of kept that styling.
So I've never done anything UI before, and it's all overwhelming, and I don't know where to start. What should I look at first to get going as a beginner?
As a beginner to get going is pretty much look at a lot of UIs. Like start paying attention. The same way if I would give an example. If you ever watched CinemaSins on YouTube, then after watching that YouTube channel, I cannot watch a movie without being critical of every freaking detail in a movie. I was like, why are you doing that? Why is that? It doesn't make sense. There's a plot hole right here. And so UI-wise as well, start paying attention to the sites and the apps that you're going to and looking at the colors that they're using. Take snapshots on your phone of the app or the game or whatever, and then bring it into Photoshop and like using the color picker tool to like see what the colors are, and then you can look up on Google as like color theory, right? Go on YouTube and search up color theory. Why certain colors work? Certain colors bring about certain emotions, like orange makes you hungry, and blue is sort of a downer color, and red is an aggressive color. And why is that? Like, what's the psychology of that? And it is not an easy process. It's not something you can pick up in one day, right? This is going to if you're doing it, if you're a programmer and you're doing this as something you want to get better at doing UI, you're going to have to put a lot of effort into like knowing, at least being decent at it. But yeah, it's like it's a lot of looking at UIs basically, and then thinking critically. Why are they doing this, right? Asking yourself the questions: why are they using this? Why are they not doing this? I have a better solution. Maybe even mock up your better solution and see if it's actually true. Any more questions?